Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Stacy Best. I'm the Executive Director of Lawyers Concerned for Lawyers. And on behalf of LCL, the Mass Bar Association, the Asian American Lawyers Association, MAHA, the Massachusetts Association of Hispanic Attorneys, the South Asian Bar Association of Greater Boston, the Women's Bar Association, the Boston Bar Association, and Lawyer Wellbeing of Massachusetts, I want to welcome you to our panel today. I am pleased to be moderating this panel on mentoring and well-being in the law. We are joined by a group of esteemed panelists. And first, let me tell you a little bit about the topic, and then I will introduce our panelists briefly and allow them to say anything else about themselves that they'd like to share, but like to jump right into the conversation because I'm hoping that it will indeed be engaging one. The practice of law has traditionally been built on the apprenticeship model, which has been designed to teach lawyers how to practice law. But more recently, and most particularly with respect to the 2023 NORC report, we're learning that it takes more and lawyers need more in order to thrive in the legal environment. That one of the major findings of that report was that a supportive work environment was one of the key elements to successful lawyering. And so we're looking at the fact that mentorship is a powerful tool for promoting engagement, fostering belonging and connection for the mentor and the mentee alike. And if done well, our panelists agree that it is a key element to helping both the mentee succeed and those for whom the mentee works for. We're going to start off our discussion with Joan Parsons Zaidi, who is the founder of Winslow Workplace Advisors. Joan is a lawyer and has been a lawyer and a partner in a major law firm, and it works to help law firms expand mentoring and create a strong feedback culture. We have Robert Harris, who is with us. Actually, I should pause. Welcome, Joan. Would you like to say anything else about yourself?
Thank you, Stacy. No, it's great to be here. Thank you for having me.
All right. Next, we have Robert Harris, who is here from Hinckley Allen. He is Hinckley Allen's Chief Practice Group Management Officer. He supports all the firm's 4 major practice groups and serves as an advisor to the managing partner and the executive committee. And in that role, helps develop talent across the firm. Welcome, Robert. Is there anything you would like to share further about yourself?
Thank you, Stacy. Happy to be here. And I'll just add, I'm a recovering lawyer myself. So
thank you for that. Next, we have Gavin Alexander. Gavin is currently the wellness director of Jackson Lewis, a major law firm. He is experienced and passionate advocate in mental health, well-being, diversity, equity, and inclusion. Prior to joining Jackson Lewis, he was also serving on the SJC Wellbeing Committee. Welcome, Gavin. Is there anything you would like to share?
Thanks. Happy to be here. Like Robert, I also practiced as a lawyer at a large firm for many years before transitioning full-time into lawyer well-being advocacy and support.
Thank you, Gavin. Next, we have Zane Fernandez, who is a corporate attorney at Gesmer Updegrove LLP in Boston. He is a relatively new lawyer to the profession and going to share with us his perspective on the newer side, and both as a mentee and perhaps as a mentor. He formerly worked at Ropes and Gray, and as I said, now is at Gesmer Updegrove. Zane, thank you and welcome.
Thank you, Stacy. Honored to be here.
And last, but certainly not least, one of my most favorite people in the world, Professor Ingrid Hillinger, It has taken me a long time to be able to call you Ingrid, because I knew you in that formal setting. But Professor Hillinger is a longtime teacher and instructor or professor at Boston College Law School, who teaches a variety of commercial law and bankruptcy courses, including bankruptcy, contracts, and secure transaction. Had 2 of those courses with her. She is terrifying in the classroom, but full of love and passion. She is a longtime mentor to many students, and in many ways draws this panel together through the variety of relationships she has had over the course of her career. So welcome, Ingrid. Is there anything you would like to share?
No, just that by total circumstance, one of my mentees, Zane, is on this panel.
Excellent. Thank you. All right, so we're going to jump in. We're first going to define mentorship, and then we'll talk a bit about the mechanics of the mentor-mentee relationship. We'll talk about the intersection of mentoring and well-being, and then we'll talk about providing meaningful real-time feedback as an important element of the mentor relationship. And finally, we will end with some takeaways. As I said, we have just about an hour for the conversation. I invite guests to put questions in the Q&A, but please understand that I won't be turning to those questions until we're nearing the end of our hour, and we'll sort of play it by ear in terms of those questions and the takeaways. So Joan, I'm going to start with you and ask you to give us a definition of mentorship.
Sure. Thanks, Stacy. So when we think about the definition of mentorship and we think about the question, what is a mentor? There's a lot to talk about. It covers a lot of ground, the answer to that question. But when we boil it down to fundamentals, a mentor is somebody that we can trust, somebody who supports us, somebody that we feel that gets us, and that we can go to ask questions without being judged or criticized, somebody who can advise us. There's a teaching element, sometimes a training element, sharing stories with a mentor and getting feedback about how to navigate different circumstances, difficult circumstances, and just basically helping us navigate our workplace in many, many ways. And we often have more than one mentor, whether we call each of those people a mentor or not. And that's really beneficial when we think about it, because we learn different things from different people. We can pick up different things just from a skills perspective, from a style perspective, from all kinds, all the inputs add to the richness of our experience at work. And the more connections we can have, the better as well. So all of this adds up to, creating trust and connection. And at the bottom line of mentorship, really, that's what it's all about.
So, Robert, let me come to you. I'm hearing Joan talk about the mentorship and the connection, but as in your role at Hinckley Allen, can you give us a little more definition? We hear some about informal and formal mentorship, which is embedded a little bit in what Joan had to say, but can you tease that out a little more for us?
Yeah, happy to. First, let me say, I agree with Joan's definition of mentorship. I would also hasten to add that people often use the terms mentorship, sponsorship, coaching interchangeably, and there's some slight yet important differences. I would say mentorship is probably the more holistic relationship of all of those and subsumes elements of both. Sponsorship, which is focused more on career advancement, so more narrowly focused, and coaching tends to be more specific skill or performance related. So you'll hear often a writing coach or an oral presentation coach. That's very much focused on a particular skill. Mentors can do all of the above and more, right? But as to your question, Stacy, mentorship relationships tend to take 2 forms, at least in the law firm space. There are formal mentorship programs, and then there are informal mentorship relationships. Formal mentorship programs, which likely, a creature of the law firm space, are very structured, right? So they have many common features. There's a matching process. There's a specified duration, 9 months, a year, 2 years. There's administrative oversight. A lot of times there's a program director, there's a budget, right? There's a lot of structure, and it's tied to some strategic business objectives for the organization. Whether it's integration or professional development, those mentorship programs, those are sort of the hallmarks of a structured mentorship program. Conversely, informal mentorship programs have very little structure. Right? They are natural, they are organic relationships that develop through common interests, proximity, familiarity, variety of factors, right? And oftentimes they are driven by the mentee, who sort of seeks out that relationship in many ways, right? And there's value to both of those. And in many cases, I think law firm associates benefit from having both formal and informal mentor relationships. But there are, as I just outlined, some subtle distinctions.
So I'm going to invite anyone else who wants to jump in, but let me just stay with you for a second, Robert, in terms of making mentor-mentee matches on a formal level. If you have some suggestions, given what Joan said about the need for trust, the need for the capacity to build a rapport where a mentee can, not her word, but mine, be vulnerable enough with the mentor so that they can get the best, get the most out of the relationship. Do you have some suggestions?
Yeah, so the matching process is sort of fundamental or foundational to the mentor relationship, right? That's sort of step one. And once upon a time, I would have argued it was more science than art, right? You looked at practice areas. Okay, you want a corporate partner to be matched with a corporate associate because they can help them develop professionally. I would argue nowadays as the mentorship relationship has evolved, you have to take a wider gaze and look at other factors beyond just practice group area, things like that. It's a personal match, right? You want to look at personality styles, introverts versus extroverts. What are people looking for? So a lot of times you'll have people do questionnaires and truly try to understand, like, okay, what are your goals and objectives, right? Some people want things like demographics to be taken into account. So these are all helpful in informing and setting up the mentor relationship. You have to know your people, right? And so there's a conventional wisdom in firms that certain people are good mentors, but based on experience, you know that that's actually not the case, right? Because you get feedback from associates like, this person may be a great rainmaker, they may be a fabulous lawyer, they're not a great mentor, right? And so, and therefore it may not be inappropriate to match them, mindful of personalities and styles. And so questionnaires are helpful, and think beyond just like hard skills. Think about personality styles, career objectives, what people's objectives are for the mentorship program. The last point I'll add here is to my point about art versus science. There are now mentor algorithms, right? So it is definitely shifted more towards science, but it really underscores how important the matching process is, because it can be hit or miss if people are not matched properly.
Gavin, do you have something that you might add as a sort of well-being director, having both been a mentee and sort of from the well-being director of Jackson Lewis, but also your work at the SJC Wellbeing Committee?
Sure. Obviously have lots to add.
Well, we are limited on time. So.
Yes, noted. So one of the things I think that has come up that I think it sort of sits at the intersection of what Joan and Robert have brought up is, who is an ideal mentor and what does an ideal mentor bring to the table? And frankly, should anyone who says, I want to be a mentor, be allowed to be either a formal or informal mentor, or should, at the very least, they have to go through some sort of skills training and evaluative process to become a good mentor? Because failed mentors can cause harm to a individual, as opposed to actually helping, right? If someone goes to someone they think they can trust, as Joan said, trust and connection are key. If someone goes to the person who's assigned as their mentor, who they think they can trust to give them really insightful advice, and that person turns around and starts telling everyone what awful questions that this random junior person asked me, that's not a good mentor, even if they may have been formally assigned as that person's mentor. So thinking through, what does a good mentor bring to the table? And are you, if you're structuring a formal program, are you evaluating, first off, are you training people on what those skills are at the outset when they come in to become a formal mentor? And second, are you evaluating them in the back end by, exactly as Robert sort of said, asking for folks who have been their mentees to provide feedback on the mentorship experience they had? One particular component I wanted to add is the distinction and relevance of supervisor versus mentor. Because supervisors, right, are the people who are assigning you work and reviewing the quality of your work and giving you feedback and all of that. From my perspective, the best supervisor is also a mentor. They become someone who the more junior person can trust, can implicitly relate to, can ask stupid questions, ask questions about their long-term career process, even questions about, like, I'm not sure I want to stay in this job. What do you think are good options for me in my next capacity? The reason I say that, that the best supervisor also becomes a mentor is because folks, when you give feedback to someone, particularly like negative or constructive feedback, they are going to hear it and internalize it in a productive, well-being centered way a lot better if they actually trust you and have that connection. So if you're someone who you have no mentorship relationship with someone you are supervising, then when you give them feedback, they have no reason to trust that you are actually giving them that feedback with the motivation of trying to help them improve, rather than just trying to make them feel bad about themselves or fear making mistakes in the future. So that's some initial thoughts I had.
Can I
Thank you.
sort of jump in, Stacy?
Yeah, I was actually going to come to you, so please.
And talk about trust and how is it that you create trust? And to me, the essence of mentoring is for the mentee to understand you want them to succeed. That is the foundation. And you can pretty much say or do anything if they really believe everything's coming from the right place with the right reason.
And to follow up on that, I was going to ask you, Ingrid, again, having known you from my law school days and watching you lean over the podium and challenge responses in the classroom, how is it that you can be both fearsome and engender trust? What's some of your secret sauce?
I think it's the same thing I just said. The students know I care, and so I demand. And they want to be held to a high standard, and they want to meet that standard. So long as they know what I'm doing is not for my benefit, it's not because I love to be a masochist, it's because I am teaching them and training them. And as I say, the thing that students are constantly saying is, I know you care. That means, and that's hard, by the way, when you're a practicing lawyer mentoring. I mean, it's easy as a teacher, that's my job. But I really think that, first of all, I commend law firms for trying to do this and trying to match, because matching is important. And I hope you're not asking anybody who doesn't want to be a mentor to be a mentor, because that's just already, going to fail. But I think it's hard because that's not the primary job of lawyers. The primary job of lawyers is to make money and serve clients and so forth. And so I think it's terrific that law firms care and want to do a good job of this. I mean, it ultimately is in their best interest, because you're going to keep people, you're going to make them happy, they're going to be productive, they'll be good mentors themselves. But
yeah, I mean, I think that I'd sort of like to dive into that a little bit in terms of the connection. I mean, I'm familiar enough, and perhaps Joan can jump in here as well, that I'm aware that some of your mentees talk about the things you offer or have offered them beyond how to respond on a test. In other words, more like what Robert is saying, sort of beyond the strict structure, you're helping them in terms of how to dress for an interview, how to respond in a letter or respond to a letter, or sort of the coaching elements. You know, what is it that draws you in that direction? And again, I think, Joan, feel free to jump in as a lawyer in a firm who turned to or has focused on mentorship and growing mentorship, what it is you're trying to generate in the form of connection and how that comes about.
Yeah, I think, Stacey, I'd be happy to jump in here. And I'd also like to just share that Ingrid has been a mentor of mine for many years, since I was in her classroom many years ago. And one of the things that then I called her Professor Hillinger, but she did well. And I think that a good mentor does well is it's starting with communication style and, you know, taking down any barriers with like intimidation or any sort of, you know, power play, or, you know, I'm the professor and you're the student, or I'm the partner and you're the associate. And again, Ingrid has done that so well with so many people. And I think an ideal mentor is somebody who can put the mentee at ease, and ask questions, thoughtful questions, and then listen. It's very important to listen, take the feedback, whether it ends up being something you want to hear or not. It's important to hear it and then to iterate. So I think, again, communication is a lot of it. Are we approachable? Are there any barriers to somebody being able to trust us? And, you know, really trying to have a good, strong back and forth with the communication.
Ingrid, did you want to jump in? I was going to pitch a question to Zane.
No, pitch it to Zane.
All right, Zane, does any of this resonate with you as someone who has been a mentee, and as you think about yourself and what you can offer as a mentor, even in the early years of your career, does the conversation resonate in terms of what has been helpful to you?
Definitely. I think one of the common themes that I've been hearing from everybody speaking is vulnerability on both ends. But I think specifically on the mentee end, it is important, speaking personally for me, to be vulnerable to get that advice from my mentors. But I think the issue that comes up sometimes with mentorship relationships is, especially the junior level, like how vulnerable can I be, and how much of my life, personal life, that is impacting my professional life can I share to get that advice that would actually give me that holistic picture and pathway forward. And I think the best mentors do disarm their mentees and that's what I try to do with my mentees who are in law school, of just how I speak to them, the stuff I choose to share with them, to let them know they can then share things like that with me. All of those very intentional social connections, that's how you show somebody that it's okay to come to me, even if something may be a gray area where you don't know if this will come off as a professional thing to talk about or something. We can work through that and discuss that if that were to come up, but at least you feel safe to be vulnerable and get that candid advice to move forward in your career.
Gavin, in our prep call, you shared an anecdote with us about a mentor-mentee relationship you had that helped you work through a difficult experience. Are you okay with sharing that and sort of giving us the learning, what you gleaned from that?
Yeah, 100%. And before I jump into the story, I wanted to very much echo what Zane just said. From a mental health and well-being standpoint, there is no better way to establish a connection than expressing your own vulnerability. If you are every junior folks fear that they must be perfect at all times in order to succeed, to dismantle, and no one is perfect, to be clear. Every single one of you listening on this call, on this panel, every single one of you has made significant mistakes in your career. I have made.
Hold up there, Gavin. Hold up. No, just kidding.
And so no one is perfect. And if you are a great mentor, the way you can really establish that connection right off the bat is show to your mentee how not perfect you are and how you've still been able to succeed and thrive. Because without that, they are going to have their walls up because they fear they are modeling themselves after the image of perfection that's being presented. So getting into this story, a great mentor I had, who, by the way, I am one of the few people on this panel who appear to be unlucky enough to have not had Professor Hillinger as a mentor in my career. But many of the best mentors I have had in my life, including this one, demonstrate a sort of similar demeanor that's been described for Professor Hillinger of you can be blunt, you can be honest, you can be clear, and still be a great mentor. In fact, I would argue all of the best mentors do that. When you try to sort of coddle someone or hide the ball or present something that isn't real, mentees get that. So this mentor of mine was a established partner at the firm I worked at when I was a corporate associate for 7 years. And this mentor of mine was known, like, I would describe him to others as a great, like, sports coach. He would bark, he would tell you when you got something wrong, but you always knew it was coming from that intention that Professor Hillinger described of wanting to make it better for you, wanting to make you better. And the way he demonstrated this was even in little things that had nothing to do with performance. So things like one time he saw me in the office late at night, not working on anything related to him or his clients, but he'd seen me there a couple times in a row, and he just swung by. He was like, "Hey, I see you've been working really hard and you've been here a lot. I just want to say A, thank you, and B, if at some point in the future, if you want to take your partner out to dinner on me, just bill it to my account," and done. That had no interest for him. I wasn't working on his clients. I wasn't generating revenue for his or prestige for his practice, but he saw me. He saw me in moments when he knew I was going through stuff, and he just gave an acknowledgement and offered an action of support. So that's a great way to establish some trust, right? He also talked a lot about the mistakes he had made in his career. And when I did make mistakes, he would often say, like, "Well, I used to do stuff like that, and here's how I learned not to." So again, that vulnerability. When the moment you're asking me to describe, and the one I described on the prep call, was an incident where the firm actually at a high level did something that I viewed as a identity-based sort of microaggression that applied pressure to certain queer individuals, certain members of the LGBTQ community to express certain things in certain ways. This partner, my mentor, is a straight white man with a former military background, like not a member of the LGBTQ community, no openly LGBTQ members of his direct family. And yet, because I knew he cared about me and had invested in wanting to make me succeed, I sort of already knew that I could go to him and say, "Hey, this thing the firm did made me feel uncomfortable. How do you think I should respond? Or what do you think I should do about it, if anything?" And then rather than tell me sort of, "Oh, you have to understand the firm is this large, huge institution and it's going to do what it's going to do. And it was all done with the best of intentions. Don't worry about it. Just, it's totally fine." Instead of acting defensive or trying to sort of justify the firm's behavior, he heard me and he empowered me to amplify my own voice. What he did was he said, you should make your voice heard on this. I think you should write an email directly to the managing partner of the entire firm, explaining how this impacted you, what your perspective is, and I'm going to help you write it. So I'm going to leave it to you to prepare a draft. You're going to send it to me. I'm going to mark it up. We're going to discuss it together. And then when you send it to the managing partner of the firm, you're going to say, I discussed this with my mentor's name, and you're going to copy me on the email. So he knows, so the managing partner knows I've got your back and that I'm in this with you. So that was just like the perfect, for me, encapsulation of that relationship, because this was not something that directly affected him in any way. But rather than sort of stepping into the role of, I'm a partner and I must protect the firm at all costs, he stepped into the perspective of, here's someone we've invested in, here's someone we believe is smart and a good lawyer, and we want to succeed, and we want to keep this person, and we want to keep people like this person. And if they're bringing up a really good point, let's empower them to speak their truth, to speak it effectively, and I will train them in ways that will wind up helping my practice, right? Negotiating with the managing partner of the entire firm, that's going to wind up helping my corporate practice. It's going to clarify my writing skills. It's going to clarify my interpersonal negotiation skills. So it all comes back to performance anyway. But it was treated through a lens of empowering, support, trust, and connection.
So this I want to pitch to whoever wishes to pick up the ball, and please don't anybody let it roll by. You know, we're talking a lot about vulnerability and sort of giving peeks behind the curtain in terms of perfection and perfectionism. How do you navigate that in some of the more formal settings? Judges, you know, in a courtroom, you know, in a firm setting. What do you say to mentors who are more likely to be reserved because they're in what might be considered a conservative or very formal environment? And how do you avoid being taken as unprofessional, so to speak?
I'd be happy to jump in with a thought and then invite others to do so as well. I would say that try to find something to connect on with anybody that you're talking to in any setting. I like to think about it as small talk is a big deal. A lot happens with small talk. I often talk to people about my dog. I love my dog. Somebody else has a dog, or my kids, or, you know, you can start anywhere with the weather, whatever the case may be, just so that everybody can take a breath, you know, deflate a little bit and, you know, relax a little bit. So just start somewhere, I think, and small talk often can get the ball rolling.
Well, that sort of raises a question, is certainly I'll say on a personal level for me as a Black woman. So Robert, I'm gonna come to you and ask, you know, someone who is sort of in the leadership, if you will, of a firm, but is a recovering lawyer. So you've been through it. How do you, as a person of color, do you have any suggestions, you know, for the management side, somebody in the mentor position? And even though this panel is mostly about that, on the other side, like, how do you open up those conversations when you come from very different worlds?
Right. So first, as a threshold matter, I think the intersection of mentoring and DEI is really important. And while I'm a big fan of informal mentorship relationships, I will take this opportunity to tout the importance of formal relationships, because I would submit that they are instrumental in supporting DEI efforts. Now, why do I say that? We have to recognize that for historically underrepresented attorneys, they don't always have the same access to the social networks on which informal networking, mentoring thrives. So, you know, if, you know, informal mentoring sort of leads people to their own devices, and relationships develop organically, and people will gravitate based on any number of things, which is great when it works. It can be disastrous when it doesn't. And particularly for historically underrepresented attorneys who, again, may feel ostracized or marginalized, can't tap into some of those networks that will allow them then to benefit from the invaluable informal mentoring. So formal programs actually can deconstruct those walls and allow historically underrepresented attorneys and connect them with movers and shakers in the firm, right? I'm mindful of Gavin's story, and it sounds like your formal mentor did you a great service and was instrumental in your development, right? So I think when you think about DEI and and firms are obviously focused on DEI as an important initiative, but mentorship plays a role in that, in allowing historically underrepresented attorneys to get access to all the benefits of mentoring, because unfortunately you can't always leave folks to their own devices.
Could I chime in real quick with something there?
Sure, I think so. Go ahead.
Okay, just a very quick data point supporting what Robert just said. The Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court Standing Committee on Lawyer Wellbeing back in 2021 released a report summarizing affinity bar town hall meetings, summarizing input on the lived experiences of lawyers from underrepresented and historically excluded populations in Massachusetts. One of the key points they raised, over 100 or so, 120, I think, lawyers participated in these town hall meetings. One of the key points they raised, and I'm quoting from the report, says, attorneys from the affinity bar populations have difficulty finding mentors and sponsors who share their identities and can help advance their careers, because few have advanced to positions where they can genuinely offer long-term career advice. Further, the willing mentors among these groups often feel overburdened with the number of law students and junior attorneys who seek their mentorship and sponsorship, and report that they wind up either turning potential mentees away or not providing them with the level of mentorship they feel such individuals deserve. So getting back to Robert's point, if we leave it to their own devices, there aren't enough lawyers from marginalized groups at those senior levels to provide all of the mentoring that folks from junior levels need from underrepresented communities. So we need formal relationships for members in the more overrepresented populations to actually take on mentoring of those from underrepresented and historically excluded groups in junior areas.
So to that point, Robert, or Joan, whoever can help with the idea of, I hear the recommendation being to establish a formal mentor program that is specifically targeted or to address DEI, and certainly DEI is part of well-being, right? If we're not all doing well, then your well-being strategy is failing. So what do you suggest in terms of how to facilitate those matches, even so when you're doing it formally? What would you add or look for to ensure or help ensure the success of that program with respect to the DEI elements of it, the connection?
Well, I think one of the important things to think about is, it's hard to do this if it's a force, right? Nobody likes to feel like any of it is a force. So that brings us back to the conversation about connection and developing deeper connections with each other as a foundation. And then we can go on to do things that might feel more difficult. So I kind of bring it back to that. Where are we on the connection spectrum before we start, getting into other things? And I think it's okay to give informal mentoring a nudge. We have formal mentoring, we know how to do that, we make matches, etc. I agree with what's been said already wholeheartedly that, but we can't just cross our fingers when it comes to informal mentoring. I think we need to give it a nudge, maybe even a push. So how do we do that? Well, we make sure that people are talking to each other. If that seems a little bit artificial at first, it'll get easier. we talk to practice managers, we talk to team managers, and we say, this is what we need to do. We need check-ins. We need them on this kind of basis. We need a pulse check. How are your people doing? Are you asking them? Are you asking them every day? What is the cadence there and how's it going? Are we asking people, how are you doing? How are you doing with work? How are you doing generally? Do you have everything you need? Do you have, technology wise, support wise? So I think it comes back to, what is the level of communication and connection? And, let's find ways, let's be more proactive, even when it comes to informal mentoring.
Ingrid, I know it from my perception, and correct me if my perception is inaccurate, much of the mentoring you have done is informal, but I also know, for instance, that you were someone upon which many of the BALSA students, in particular Black Law Students Association, for instance, rely. I don't know really your background, but I guess my question is, how do you as a commercial law professor connect with students from backgrounds very different from yours?
I don't think that we have to have the same background for me to care and want them to have a seat at the table. And that's what I say. And I'm dedicated to the idea that underrepresented lawyers or people from underrepresented populations of whatever kind, and there's so many, have the opportunity to be at the seat at the table. And that actually gives me great joy. And I actually inserted myself into their lives. It wasn't organic, so to speak. It was, I'm here, I want to help you, let me know how I can help you. And then, as Joan was saying, you check in and you watch. You really do have
There's
to
a choice there.
Say it again?
There's a choice. You intentionally decided that you wanted to be helpful because you could appreciate that those you were trying to help didn't necessarily have the same opportunities as Robert mentioned and as the statistics show that other students would have.
Yes, I hear, and I'm sure that African-American people who are practicing law feel the same way. They're in a predominantly white community, and BC is a predominantly white community, and it's different, and it's sometimes overwhelming, and there are more hurdles for students who don't feel comfortable than there are for students who do feel comfortable. So I gravitate to students for whom there are more hurdles, and it's not just African-American students. There are plenty of hurdles of all different kinds. So
I just wanted to underscore
Good. Yeah.
Professor Hillinger said about that proactiveness. The proactive nature, I think, is something that can't be overlooked. I think for me, I've experienced that with Professor Hillinger as well, where she'll send me emails even after graduations, checking in on me actively. When I first started at my first legal job at Ropes, the first week, one of my mentors stopped by my office and he was like, hey, let's go circle around the floor and I'm going to introduce you to everybody that's available. And so I met like everybody on my floor within that first week, which really just helped me so much with not feeling nervous to introduce myself further, or I already know some people, so you get a little more confidence. And I think it also speaks especially to students and attorneys, especially young attorneys from underrepresented backgrounds, where you could be battling with imposter syndrome and I'm in a predominantly white space, and do I belong here? Can I be myself here? All of these questions that you may have. And if you have somebody like that who you know is intentionally looking out for you and is actively saying, hey, let's go to this event and I'll introduce you to several people there, or let me take you to lunch. I think it is also important for the mentee to have some responsibility of being proactive and reaching out as well. But more often than not, I think a lot of that responsibility falls on the mentor to bring them in.
So Stacey,
To sort of bring that home, Yeah, just give me a second.
Okay.
Can you hold your thought? To sort of bring that home, I want to flip it a little bit and just say from my own experience, if I walk into a room where it's a largely white environment, there's this immediate trigger in my head that says friend or foe. And I really am looking around and at the white folks to be playing and wondering, are they going to be friendly towards me, or is this someone who has a more traditional view about who belongs in this room? And then there's also the piece, I don't know that I would call it imposter syndrome, but there's also the piece that I'm aware that I come from a working class background without the exposure to golf, to opera, to Broadway musicals, although I love them now. That it took me a while to develop so that I could have conversations about something other than what are you cooking for dinner tonight or whatever. Robert, go ahead.
So I just wanted to make a quick observation and sort of highlight a theme that has emerged from this conversation or throughout our conversation. And that is, regardless of the type of mentor relationship, formal or informal, the role of the mentor in particular is key. The mentor, he, she, or they set the tone of the relationship. They can signal that it's okay to have conversations about vulnerability. They can signal, when you talk about like they're friendly and want to have conversation and dictate the tone of the conversation. Yes, I mean, Zane is right. The mentee does have a responsibility of help, cultivating the relationship. But let's not forget, there's a power dynamic in mentor-mentee relationships, especially at the outset. And so one thing we can always remind our mentors, like, you set the tone, you initiate the relationship, and let the associate know, let the student know that I want to hear from you. Right. Let's talk about these issues. Tell me about your professional development goals. Tell me about your struggles. Tell me about your background. These are things that kind of set the tone of the relationship and define the scope of what's appropriate and will put the mentee at ease. I can now talk about, I had an assignment last week. I really struggled, and I can do so in a judgment-free environment because I know my mentor has my best interest at heart.
So whatever the issues of vulnerability might be, they ought not be about letting the mentee or letting a junior person know that they can approach you.
100%. And part of that vulnerability is to share their own experiences, mishaps of which we all have gone through, right? Yeah, I know what it's like to be a junior associate. I missed some deadlines. I struggled with some things, and I lived to tell. Here's some traps for the unwary. Here are some tips that you want to think about, some strategies to employ when you encounter these type of situations, right? That is incredibly helpful to the associate or to the student to let the person know, like, okay, I can engage on this level, right? Because, as a new student, as a new associate, right, we're all trying to impress. We're trying to get off to the best footing possible. And so you're wary of showing vulnerability because you think this might be weaponized against me.
Thank you. So we're sort of winding down on time, and one of the things we spent a lot of discussion on in the prep call had to do with giving feedback, and we talked a little bit about sort of not hiding the ball and making sure that you're direct. But I want to put out there the question about, okay, so great, we're building this relationship and this rapport. What's it all for?
Can I set the stage for this discussion? Because I think I'm the one that precipitated.
I know you had something that was burning on you the last time we talked, please.
Well, so I've spoken to many students, obviously alums, who are practicing, and everything was fine until it wasn't. And then they're told goodbye, or you have 6 months to find another job. And there is a major disconnect there. And one of the questions I wanted to ask those in law firms is, you have a formal mentor, you have an informal mentor, but then you have the supervisor, and the supervisor is the one who's saying, this wasn't very good work or whatever. And what's the communication between supervisor and mentor? That I think there needs to be some work done there, because I certainly, some of my students have not received the message. So that's how this discussion started.
And sadly, Professor Hillinger, there isn't enough communication between mentors and supervisors. I would add that further to the point of real-time feedback, the most important relationship is between the supervisor and the associate, right? And far too often, the associate is the last to know, right? We call it evaluation by ambush, right? And to some extent, you know, I try to empower associates. We have a real-time feedback program which enables associates to solicit feedback on their own, right? But, you know, some associates will adopt the no news is good news philosophy, which is, there's a danger in that, right? Because then you're playing right into the, like, well, I'll find out in my annual evaluation. But lawyers don't like, as much as we are type A aggressive folks, they don't like giving negative feedback, right? And lawyers are what I guess the kids nowadays say are keyboard warriors.
Mm.
They'll pull their punches, right? In terms of sharing, like, this was not a very good work product and here's why. And they'll stew on that for weeks or months. And then when the evaluations come out, they'll lower the boom. And that is very destabilizing. It engenders mistrust and is not really conducive to an environment where people feel like you are genuinely interested in my professional development. So, you know, there has been a concerted effort in the law firm space over the past 4 or 5 years with a focus on real-time feedback. Some of the vendors now have, like, you know, software that really focuses on it. I would still say it's underutilized. I would still, by both partners and associate, it is still a pain point in law firms, the lack of real-time feedback. And it's something I always encourage our people to lean in, but it's definitely an area of continuous improvement.
So one of the conversations I had recently with a former student, he was let go, and he said that he was put on a PIP. I said, a PIP? What's a PIP? Performance improvement plan. I'd never heard of this before. So are law firms doing that?
Yes, they should. Yes, formally, yeah, yes, they should, right? Some of them, they go by different names, but a PIP essentially is, all right, Ingrid, we've noticed that you have issues with meeting, you know, with time management or, you know, deadlines or your writing. So it outlines specific performance issues and gives you a specified period of time, 90 days, where the firm says, we need to see meaningful improvement with respect to these specified areas of deficiency. Absent that, further remedial action, i.e. termination, is on the table, right? That, in short, is what a performance improvement.
And how much support do you give to the person who needs to make improvement in this area? Because just to say you need to improve, obviously they haven't learned it.
Great follow-up, right? Because this is what happens far too often in law firms. The stigmatization of the associate, right? People sort of like, everyone's hands on, once word gets around that this associate isn't very good, people vote with their feet in law firms. And so therefore they don't have as many opportunities to course correct, right? So sometimes it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? I'm giving you this 90-day PIP, but good luck finding those opportunities. Now, the most meaningful PIPs, law firms, administration will take an active role in trying to facilitate opportunities for that associate to course correct. So you will partner with, in our firm, talent management, will partner with the practice group leaders to make sure that you, Ingrid, get meaningful opportunities to address those time management issues. Otherwise, it's not worth the paper it's written on. If I tell you, you have to make improvements, but good luck finding those opportunities to improve in the next 6 months. Oh, you ran out of time. You know, here's your severance package.
Okay, so Robert, another question, another issue. A student is doing work for corporate and bankruptcy, for example, And you do that, which is apparently up the wrong thing to do because you're behind them with each of the groups. And then you're criticized because you're not keeping up with members of your class. And shouldn't the mentor step in and say, you shouldn't be doing that, or you need to say no to the next assignment that comes in? Because they're getting overloaded. And it seems to me the law firm should have some responsibility in protecting and helping because they're afraid to say no.
Yes, right. So this sort of is a work allocation issue, and mentors can play a role, right? Work allocation in law firms can come in different forms. There's sort of some firms have what I'll call a centralized work allocation system where all work will flow through an administrator or a partner in the group. And so that person ideally will distribute work in a fair and equitable manner with an eye towards skill development and things like that, opportunities, make sure Zaid isn't overburdened while Joan has nothing to do, right? So that's, but that's largely a creature of the big firms who have the administrative infrastructure to implement. Mid-size, small firms, boutique firms, or what I'll call sort of laissez-faire, right? Right. And that's where the vote where your feet stuff comes into play. This really isn't meaningful oversight of distribution. So there's far more likely the scenario you describe where people get loaded up, right? And the burden falls on the associate to manage his or her or their workload to say no. And it's hard for a junior associate who's trying to make an impression, trying to develop their skills, to put the burden on him or her or they to say, I can't do that assignment, right? And not deal with the consequences. Oh, this person isn't receptive to work. This person doesn't know how to stretch, right? Those are all the things. So there needs to be meaningful oversight as best as the firm's administrative structure will allow to make sure that people are not only getting meaningful work opportunities, but they're not being overburdened or in some cases ignored entirely, right?
If I could,
Yeah, go ahead. I hope you're going to also, though, address, Joan, the issue of the challenge for giving that difficult feedback and some ways to mitigate, if you will, the stress of giving meaningful feedback, especially if it needs to be corrective. But go ahead.
Sure. I was going to jump in first and just give a quick note about some practical advice that I give to associates who find themselves in the position that we're talking about, which is, I have too much to do. I don't want to say no. I'm going to seem like I'm not a team player. I'm going to seem like I'm defensive about my time. So what is an associate or an early career attorney to do? And I think that if we can reframe it, the answer as yes, if, instead of just yes or no, because we want to, as an associate, we want to appear enthusiastic. We are enthusiastic. We want to help out. We want to be a team player. So Joan, can you do this other thing when you have these, 14 million other things over here? I will, instead of saying yes and drowning silently or saying no and then being eaten alive by guilt because I'm afraid of the consequences of that, I say yes. If we could also just talk about, can we just go over my caseload and generally? And, that may sound very, basic, but I feel like it's really helpful as something in the moment, a practical thing to do and to be able to say yes. If we could just, take a minute to talk about the other two things that are due tomorrow, that would be really helpful. So I just wanted to mention that in case that resonates with anybody.
Yeah, we actually train associates on how to accept and decline assignments. Because there's an art to that, right?
Yes,
You do it
agree.
in such a way that the partner doesn't feel like you're just, just sloughing them off, but you're not unduly taking on work that you cannot do in a quality way.
But I want to turn back to the challenge on a mentor to give that feedback. You made the point, I think, that sometimes people don't want to have the difficult conversation on the front end and sort of wait to the annual review and then say, oh, you're not cutting it. As someone, and I think, Ingrid, you can also attest to this, as someone who has to review papers and such, and sometimes see responses that you're thinking, oh Lord, how do I help correct this in a way that's productive? It's a challenge to even do that, right? It takes time, it takes energy. And so the question I have is, what is it I can say to myself as a mentor or a supervisor to get me to dig in and give the feedback so that the mentee or the supervisee can be aware that the course correction, or that even the PIP is coming. They understand the PIP is on the way.
Is this addressed to me now?
Anyone, but yes,
Well,
I know
so
you as a professor have to see
I
this
have no
feedback.
problem giving constructive feedback. I have no problem saying to a student who's handed something in, this is a train wreck. My problem is that that student does not immediately respond and own it and say it will never happen again. That I think is the thing that you want as a supervisor, mentor, whatever, is when you're coming to someone, I always start, and I have the work product, there's no problem. That's my job. This was terrible. And here's why, with copious comments about why. It's behavior that's harder to deal with. And I will begin those conversations with, the only reason I'm having this conversation with you is because I care. And you are a total jerk, and here's why. And just explain, that you were obnoxious, that was a microaggression, whatever it is that the problem was. And they either take it or they don't. But I think it's our responsibility to have difficult conversations, whether it's difficult conversations about work product, which I think is, but I mean, behavior is also something, and I'm sure is a problem in law firms too, that there are people that do unacceptable things, including partners, by the way. And apparently they're never called on the carpet.
So Joan, as someone who has worked in the firm, it sounds like one thing that Ingrid is suggesting is that a supervisor or a mentor name the problem with the work, but also if there is a response that is discouraging the mentor, the supervisor from giving that feedback, that they name that as well. Do you A, agree with that, and B, do you have any other suggestions for how a mentor or a supervisor can lean into the difficult conversation?
Yes, I think that feedback, especially in these difficult scenarios, feedback and then feedback again and follow up again is what we need to. We need to keep the conversation going when it comes to these difficult feedback situations. And the thing that I think we as senior people need to remind ourselves of, and I think this serves as motivation to lean in to, having the difficult conversations about feedback and so forth, is what we prioritize and what we practice shows what we really care about. And giving feedback and mentoring, to me, has to be at the top of the list. And what we prioritize and do in day out, and is it give feedback? That becomes the norm. That becomes the norm in the organization, and that is really powerful. So we, as the leaders in the organization, have to take that seriously, have to really think about it, and we have to make an investment of our time and our energy and prioritize that. I mean, the people that we're giving feedback to are the future of our organization. We need to put the time in. We need to, we can be very strong and very assertive and very focused when we're talking to clients. Well, we need to do that with our people, with our internal people as well.
So just a couple of points to add here. So, we should add the qualifier when we're talking about feedback, constructive feedback, right? Let's focus on how we make the work product better and not just why it's wrong. Also, far too often in law firms, sending an associate a red line passes as feedback. Here you go. Here are my edits. I marked up the document. And I'm sure Zane, as a transactional lawyer, right, you saw plenty of that, right? That isn't always very helpful. Why did you make the changes? that you did? What's the rationale, right? That's the most effective feedback, right? This constructive, there's a sort of a term of art, it's called the FAST model. Like feedback should be frequent, accurate, specific, and timely, right? And that's a sort of good sort of mnemonic device to sort of help us think about the best way to provide feedback. But it needs to be constructive in nature. It needs to be designed to improve the quality of the work product. And lastly, not personal, right? Not questioning people's intellectual horsepower, their background. This is about the work product and how to make the work product better.
And
Does that resonate with you, Zane?
yeah, and speaking to that aspect about timeliness, from the outside looking in, at least, it seems like, well, we all know lawyers are pressed for time always. And it seems like, especially at the partner level, maybe when you're reviewing a bunch of things and you see an associate's work product, you flag in your mind, oh, I'm going to talk to them about this, and then can get kicked down the road and you're saddled with a million other things. And so maybe a lot of this real-time feedback doesn't happen because things build up. That's what I'm assuming could happen sometimes. And so one of my mentors at Ropes, where I learned a lot from her, it was the real-time feedback, and it didn't matter the mode of communication. So like, even if I emailed her something, she would either send me a response saying, just a practice tip going forward, here's how to handle it, or she would call me, or if we were in person, we would do it like that. So I think embracing all the different modes of technology and communication that we have and being able to provide feedback no matter what format it's in, I think that can maybe lessen the burden of all the time management stuff on top of mentorship and feedback, and make it more effective in real time.
Great. I think we are beginning to run on time. I see we have one, well, we're actually starting to get a couple of questions in the Q&A, and so I want to turn to those. But as we're turning to those, I want to give a moment for anyone, any of our panelists who want to offer either a takeaway from the conversation or something you might have come prepared to share as a takeaway. Okay, so I'm going to turn to the one question we have is, what would be your recommendations for small firms of solo practitioners in developing mentorship opportunities and or mentorship training? Anybody want to offer some suggestions for someone who is fairly much on their own and doesn't have the administrative oversight that Robert is suggesting larger firms can have?
I think I can speak to this as now having transitioned to a medium firm. It feels smaller to me coming from Ropes. So I think every what's really made a difference for me, every Wednesday we have a corporate weekly training where one of the partners here, all the associates, which associates and partner that runs it. So it's about 4 or 5 people in the room. We sit in a conference room and the partner will like walk through a document and really like get down into the weeds about why this is here. You take this out in this circumstance and leave this in this one. And so having those more like intimate, kind of like lunch and learn types of things. And then I would say in the small firms, I think because you have that more intimate environment, it's a lot easier for people to walk into an office, and people have that space to a partner will walk an associate through a document again more closely. So I think more of those one-on-one or like small group settings is helpful for training and mentorship. So it may not be that formalized structure that a major law firm has, but it's possible to have that.
Yeah, I would also add, Stacy, that regardless of the law firm setting, the size of the law firm, the fundamentals of the mentor-mentee relationship are the same, right? This is, at the end of the day, if I'm Zane's mentor, it's about the relationship and the chemistry, the dynamics that we develop between the two of us, right? And if I'm the mentor, am I setting the right tone? So you can do that on a small scale, solo practitioner, boutique firm, up to the largest big law firm in the market. So the fundamentals of the relationship And some of the things we talked about here apply regardless.
So another question that's in the Q&A has to do with the firm structure, and I think it sort of is on the backside of what you're saying. The question is about how to incentivize firm partners to make the time to give feedback. I think it goes back to caring, right? You have to be caring about those who are under your charge, if you will, and realize that not only are you getting supported by the work product, like that is part of the purpose of having these folks in your firm, but you're also at some point, I think, trying to create you know, the new generation, if you will, to cause the firm to continue to survive. But what else can we do to incentivize, whether it be firm partners or judges or others who may be suffering from time constraints as part of their, you know, their main job responsibilities? How do we incentivize people to put the time in?
I'll offer an idea here. I think that we can meet mentors where they are when it comes to mentoring commitments. I mean, mentoring can be more quick hit if it needs to be. I mean, that can add to someone's education, training, and experience, even if it's more short term. So, you know, my philosophy would be, we'll take what you can give us. I mean, of course, ideally, we'd like everybody to make a strong long-term commitment and really, you know, lean in. But we can have a spectrum of commitments, and we can kind of put that all together. And those of us who can dedicate more time to it could, you know, can be maybe, you know, more in charge of coordinating that and making it all come together. So it's a full package when it, you know, all comes together. But we can, you know, we can piece it together. As long as there is some continuity. I think that everybody as a mentee does need some continuity and some long-term guidance, but we can supplement that and fill in gaps with you know, something that might be more short-term and seem more doable for you know, senior people.
I mean, that strikes me as a viable suggestion in a larger firm setting, when you can have someone whose job it is to oversee and manage, if you will, the mentee pool, to be sure that they're getting this variety, the formal and informal. What about the situation, I guess, going back to the sort of solo, and maybe the answer is there's no substitution for care. But like, what about a situation where you don't have someone who's managing and overseeing the entire process? Do you have any thoughts about that?
Well, I think you're right, Stacey, that it does come back to caring and priorities. You know, I mean, we all have the same number of hours in the day, but we each set our priorities. And so we have to do the best we can to prioritize the mentoring, because it's honestly, it's an investment. And it's also, let's not forget, a two-way street. It's not just the mentee who's benefiting from all of this. It's certainly the mentor too. I mean, we all learn from each other. It's definitely a mutual arrangement.
And one of the questions, sort of a follow-up, is about compensation and the compensation model, the billable hours. I know, you know, everyone I talk to says the billable hour isn't going anywhere. So Robert, as someone in a place with billable hours, what do you say to that?
Well, there are some firms that will give what we call billable hour equivalent or credit for non-billable things like mentoring, recruiting, etc. So that is a thing that tends to be a creature of bigger firms that can absorb sort of they have a certain economic model. Look, I have mixed feelings about that in some ways because, my mother used to tell me you don't get credit for things you're supposed to do, right? And so, I always tell like it's in the firms and in the partnerships' interest to mentor, develop, and train young associates. It redounds to the benefit of the firm. So, and the studies, the scholarship is legion that good mentor helps foster longer term job satisfaction. It reduces attrition and turnover, which again is a benefit to the firm. But having said that, look, people are busy and there are demands on people's time. So if a firm, if it makes sense economically and you can reward people with billable hour credit, which then is quite frankly monetized for bonus purposes at the end of the year to say, look, I spent X amount of hours on recruiting, on training, on mentoring, that should be acknowledged in the form of compensation.
I would agree with that. And in terms of, there's you build in some accountability there and you show the priority given to mentoring if you're counting it, so to speak, as billable time. And also another way to do that is to really formally include it in performance evaluation metrics. I mean, when we're sitting around the table talking about performance and evaluating our people, one of the things we can talk about is, is this person participating in mentoring, and depending on the experience level, it may be more as a mentee, but certainly as we, gain more experience, is this person really serious about and invested in our organization in terms of mentoring? And if so, then that's a real plus. That's a big check. Yes, that's great in terms of, career advancement.
One of the points that was made earlier had to do with, the two-way street. And I think, Robert was just saying this about how important it is because it is the right thing to do. Are any of you seeing firms or seen environments in which mentors are being trained to how to mentor?
Not nearly as much as they should, as we should. I have seen it, but it really is part of any sort of formal mentorship program. There should be a sort of orientation training component. That's the most effective way to do it, but we don't see it done as regularly as it should be.
I was a member of an industry organization and there was mentee training, and I found it to be very helpful. So I will echo that point. The more, the better in terms of training on both sides, because that's going to optimize the experience for all involved.
And Ingrid and Zane, what would you, thinking about a training program, what is it that you would want the mentors to learn in terms of best serving not only themselves to get a good product, but serving the mentee?
I'll let Zane go first.
I think for me, I would like the focus to be a lot on the social aspects of it. I don't know how much of that can be taught, but I really think the spaces that I've been in where I felt really accepted, really comfortable, and like somebody's looking out for me or a mentor is really making the space for me is when they are in the room and let's say it's a networking event and they make sure the conversation is equally balanced and like I'm included in the conversation and people are asking about each other equally rather than like just a group of higher ups talking about some niche thing that like the juniors don't know about and can't really interact with. So like these social cues of bringing the mentee into social settings, because I think a lot of people can explain substantive legal concepts and break it down. And of course that can always improve, but it really is that day-to-day making sure the mentee feels like they belong here, that they can have fun conversation and intellectual substantive conversation, and it can all happen at once. So figuring out how to train people in that way, maybe like a sociological way and psychological, would be key to me.
Yeah, I have no idea how you would train people to be good mentors, but it seems to me one thing to do is to make sure there are opportunities for it. And maybe it could be one day a week that everybody's expected to go out to lunch or breakfast or have a cup of coffee with one person, you know, a senior person to a junior person, just to have that opportunity to get to know that person, just opportunities for interaction on a human level, because I think that's part of what is so important, is to know each other as human beings.
And I think one of the things that someone said during the prep call had to do with being able and willing to ask the mentee, for instance, how do you best receive feedback, as a way to sort of buffer or mitigate the response, the sort of difficulty of and anticipate and mitigate the difficulty of receiving feedback that might be challenging.
Yeah,
That-
I think that would be helpful. And I think that also goes to the piece I was speaking about of like training in the psychological and the sociological kind of communication aspects, and knowing how people best receive things and how people need things to be framed in order for them to digest it. Because at the end of the day, we are all human, and like we all have our own psychologies and everything. And so having an understanding of the other person you're sitting across from is going to be key in that.
One of my students works in student services at Stanford, and they ask everybody, there's a questionnaire, how do you best not just receive constructive criticism, but how do you best receive praise? You know, because it's the same kind of thing and everybody is different. And so I'd like to know who you are and how I can best facilitate this relationship. And that includes how you receive everything.
I think that, yeah, go ahead.
Oh, sorry, Stacy. I was just going to say that's reminding me of what we call the platinum rule, which I hadn't heard of until fairly recently, which is treat others as they want to be treated, not as you would like to be treated, because then you're imposing, you know, your preferences and wants on them. It's think about how they want to be treated, how they want to receive feedback or praise or whatever the case may be.
Well, and that's sort of, you know, I think it dovetails with what I was going to say in terms of it is about humanity and sort of people, right? Like you have to be able to care. And if the golden rule, though, does require the platinum rule, the golden rule requires self-knowledge and self-compassion. If you're not kind to yourself, you're not likely to be kind to others. And so in that way, it sounds like relationship being the key means that we all have work to do in terms of being good relationship partners. I want to give anyone else the last word. I have one question here about access to the recording, and I think we will be able to give access to the recording post this discussion. If Amy, you'll nod your head, she is confirming that that is true. All right, so we are just at like 30 seconds. I want to go around each one of you. Final word, Robert.
Just quickly, there was a question about how does remote work impact mentoring? And I'll just say it makes it more complicated, a little bit more difficult, but it's a reality, right? Post-pandemic, I think flexible work, remote work is here to stay. And I would say that you have to be more intentional about developing these mentor relationships, right? You know, you just can't rely on walking down the hall and seeing people, this little bumping into people. You really have to lean into the relationship and say, all right, I want to set up a time to meet with my mentee, right? Because you know, he doesn't come in on Mondays and Fridays, but you know, let's work out our schedule. Let's set up a Zoom call. Let's, when we are in the office, make sure we have time together. But you really have to be intentional about the relationship.
Ingrid.
I was going to say, whether you're a mentor or a mentee, be grateful and value that person. It goes both ways.
Zane?
I would say, speaking to all the mentees out there, if you feel like you haven't found your mentor, that one you really feel comfortable with, or a good group of mentors, don't get discouraged. Like, there are people out there that really want to help you, and just keep looking, keep talking to people, and something will click.
Joan?
There are mentor moments available to us every day, each of us, whether we are at a very experienced level or just starting out. So I think, if we can have the mindset that we're going to be proactive about finding those mentor moments and prioritize them, then that's going to benefit all of us.
I want to thank all of my panelists for joining me in this conversation. Thank you for giving us your sort of wisdom and jumping in with your ideas. Really appreciate it. Someone in the chat is saying it was amazing, and I agree. Thank you for being here, and I wish you all a good night and good luck on your journey.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you,
Thanks.
Stacy. Thanks, Amy.
Bye.
Thank you.
Did you stop the recording, Amy?
Give me 1 second.